Welcome to the Integrate Mental Health in Conversation with series. My name is Dr Natalie Kemp. I'm a clinical psychologist and founder of Integrate Mental Health and its chief executive.
Hello, welcome. My name is Natalie Sicilia. I'm also a clinical psychologist and director of Integrate Mental Health.
Integrate Mental Health, just a little bit more about it. It's a peer support and campaigning platform. Also provides consultation and training as well. I launched it originally in October 2017 as a result of experience that I had of breaking down in service as a clinical psychologist in 2015. Integrate is really about connecting peers. Peers are mental health professionals who have lived experience of mental health difficulties. There are very many of us. It's very often why we come into the scene in the first place, to help others, because we've had that experience. Maybe we've had really good experience and we really want to pay that forward. And maybe we've not had very good experience and we really want to work to make things much better in the scene around us. But there is a problem, and the problem is mental health stigma and also provider mental health stigma. It seems like there's kind of two layers going on. Mental health stigma says that recovery isn't possible, that lived experience isn't worth anything, that you have nothing to offer, and that you're not worth anything. And you can really kind of internalise that and agree with it, and that's a terrible thing. That's internalised stigma, and we often come across it and experience it ourselves. And then provider mental health stigma is kind of like another layer on top of that. It's where you feel as if you absolutely mustn't break down as a mental health professional. You must be kind of 100% together all the time, 24 hours a day, providing a service, as if you almost were that service. And you should also be completely immune to all sorts of difficulties, not least mental health ones. And certainly, if something were to happen, you should be able to just fix yourself because of the books that you've read. And obviously, that's completely wrong. It shows a really poor understanding of mental health difficulties and what it takes sometimes to get help and to recover. So it also, what it does is it helps us think that these things aren't common in humanity, that mental health professionals aren't drawn from a human population. And I think that Integrate has always been about not only destigmatising lived experience and supporting it, but also valuing lived experience. And the extent to which we can value lived experience is actually the extent also to, that we can destigmatise it. We can also really engage with those who aren't mental health professionals, who have lived experience as well. And it has really positive ramifications for thinking about building services together when lived experience is valued on the inside and in all of us. And it can help support the place of patient leadership as well, for example, which is something that we really support here. So it's definitely important to tackle stigma because it silences, it divides people, it isolates it, and it shames people. And what we want and what we really hope is that this series will help provide empowered narratives that people can get alongside and listen to as something that where lived experience enhances our professional practice. It's really normal and common amongst all of us and really opens the eyes of the system to its value.
So this series was born during COVID lockdown, and the thinking behind it was really, how do we keep this message going? How do we keep this message out there and visible to everyone, to make sure that both the providers with lived experience who might experience mental health difficulties continue to hear that they're not alone, but also that the mental health systems and the mental health scene continues to hear that, it must open up to the humanity of the workforce. So what you'll see here is really a series of episodes with different mental health professionals with lived experience who are talking exactly about that, their lived experience. So it's a window into their lives right now under these conditions.
And just to say that I started recording this before Anna came on board as a director at Integrate Mental Health, so it'll be just me that you see. Sorry about that. But it's really wonderful to have Anna with us now in the company, so that's great. I did just want to say something about COVID. COVID has really woken people up to the importance of supporting staff, but those working on those policies and in practice at the moment really must realise that they're stepping into something that's steeped in quite a stigmatised and difficult history, where the mental health scene is being really polarised and split into this us and them, which doesn't bear any resemblance to reality, really, that you know, we can all use services and we can all use help. And what's happened is that the us, so the providers, have really, as I mentioned before, kind of been very idealised and almost it's been very difficult to say actually as a provider that you need help, because of course you're supposed to be the person, you know, supporting other people all the time, and so you know 100% ready to do that, and it's just not the case. And what happens is if we kind of idealise the idea of the provider of mental health services as always being 100% okay, then the polar offset to that is that the other, the them, or those that use services are kind of denigrated. You know, they're always ill, you know, they're never of any worth or any value. And what we want to do is we really want to kind of bring us together in a sense of common humanity, because the problem is if you idolise professionals as always being forever 100%, when we break down or when we have problems, it becomes very, very difficult to say, as if we might have transgressed this idea that we can sit in either chair in the therapy room, for example. And so many of us have been both providers and users of services, and without addressing all of this background about stigma and shame about being a provider with mental health difficulties, we're kind of worried that what's being done at the moment will either miss the point completely in the COVID work, or might be superficial or not truly helpful enough. So we really want to bring forward these lived experience narratives as providers to help destigmatise, because that's really, really important to do.
And here at Integrate, when the core of our work is very much with our peers, and when it comes to that, we try to take a really open and witnessing stance. So what you will hear in the series is sort of stories and narratives from different mental health professionals, so mental health nurses, clinical psychologists, research psychologists, psychiatrists, from different countries as well. And people will speak from different positions, they will speak from different beliefs that are personally meaningful to them. And we will honour that, we will honour the individuality of all of those narratives and positions. So they will use sort of medical, diagnostic, narrative language, or a variety of those, and include a lot of themes of intersectionality as well. And there will be many perspectives that will be reflective of the mental health scene and how varied that can be as well, and how we're doing things right now in the mental health scene. So at Integrate, part of our work is to raise those voices, and Integrate is very much fueled by a peer support power base. And what we really do is try to empower those narratives and those voices from our peers, and form also good relationships with what we call the pillars of the mental health scene. So very much the trust and the workplaces, the training institutions and the professional bodies, as well as our peers. So as with the contributors to the series, Natalie and I also wanted to share our own conversations and share our own personal experiences, and most particularly also why this series is important to us, really.
Yeah. Why the series is important, it really comes back to why Integrate kind of started in the first place, and that was about desperate need for connection. So when I broke down, I just felt so alone, and because stigma silences and stops conversations from happening, it wasn't easy for me to find other people kind of like me, you know, other mental health professionals who had broken down, and it was so isolating. And it was the most important thing to reach out, which I did over Twitter, which remains like a really important platform for for us and also for Integrate. And I put out a call and before I knew it, people were answering. I was like, oh my goodness, I need to kind of put arrange a Survey Monkey thing. I can't even remember how I did that. And people had left their emails. And so I had like 50 people like within a couple of days who were mental health professionals who had lived experience of mental health difficulties. I'm like, we need to be somewhere safe. We need to go somewhere where we can really have these conversations and talk about it. And I was in recovery myself, and before I'd we're going to laugh about websites in a minute because Anna's been doing some brilliant work helping, but I'd done a gallery for my photography and things like that, so on a website. So I thought, well, I just need a website and I need a forum, and I invited those people in, and then 2 years later, before I knew it, it had like 300 members in there, which was incredible, and it was so powerful because of the sharing of the narratives that went on. Yeah. It was as helpful to me as to anybody else who was going in there, and people were saying things, or they were writing things about how helpful it was just to even read about each other's stories, and people would write different things.
Yeah, and I guess that was very much my experience, because I only recently joined Integrate as director, but my journey towards Integrate was very much from the depth of my own breakdown, and feeling very, very alone, feeling like for some strange reason I was the only clinical psychologist who was experiencing mental health difficulties. And really, I remember sort of really searching for something that would shift that for me, because there was almost like an absurdity of that, because I was obviously coming into the mental health scene with the idea that we're all human, we can all struggle, both, clients and professionals and clinical psychologists. And then my experience of then struggling was very different. It was very much an isolating and shameful and excluding experience. And I came across Integrate on Twitter, which is, we always go back to Twitter. And then I started sort of researching what it was, and joined the forum, I think, and started reading all of these very different but lovely narratives, and also painful in some ways. Yeah. But what that really did for me, it started shifting the shame in very powerful ways. It's sort of, I had a moment in particular that Natalie knows about, where I had this very physical experience of shame just leaving my body and never coming back in its own way. So
gives you goosebumps every time you say that.
Yeah, and it's and I guess that really showed me the power of narratives. So going back to the series, that is my hope for what we're doing at Integrate, to really first of all put those narratives out there, so that I guess there's a hope that people out there might hear something and think, actually, I'm not alone. It's not just me, and there's nothing wrong with it, because we're all human.
Yeah. And when you talked about that shame lifting, that's something that I experienced as well in a slightly different way. In that I was really angry as I started to recover, which kind of had a parallel process in my therapeutic journey, as well as kind of in the mental health scene, out there. I went to my professional body, and I spoke to the chair of the UK part of my professional body, and I said to him, I explained, this is what has happened, why should I feel this way? It just got to the point where I was able to kind of leave the house without Alfie, my little dog, and kind of travel into London on my own, and just kind of started to get my confidence back. It takes a while to do that stuff. I had to work from kind of the couch, and then the back garden, and then kind of across the road, and kind of build up slowly. And I'm smiling when I'm talking about my story, not because when I look back at it, I can feel so. I can now feel really compassionate about looking at the Natalie that kind of came through all of that, and that breakdown to me was. It was desperately painful. I wouldn't obviously wish it on anybody, to have these things, but for me it was really needed, because I was obviously carrying a lot of stuff which I needed to let go of. But so I went into my professional body, and I kind of said, it's absolutely outrageous given that we do so much of destigmatising for those that we see, kind of normalising of their experience given what they've been through, normalising of their distress given all the terrible things that people have often been through, that we should then, as providers, as professionals ourselves, have absolutely no one out there who to connect with, who can help us with this and who can help us feel the same way. And it's, you might not be in that job anymore, you might have left the trust, so it's not about necessarily even having access to your clinical supervisor. You might be off sick at home, and there is no sense of a policy or position by the professional bodies saying lived experience is honoured and valued, and that's one of the things that I worked on then after that with the British Psychological Society was to help with this working group, to get that out there. And that's why we're talking about the pillars, weren't we? The importance of systemic work.
Yeah, and that was very much my experience, just feeling really, really alone. And I remember there was probably a week or two where it shifted to anger. So very similar to what you're saying. Yeah. So I had all this anger about, it's not possible. It almost like it seemed very impossible and absurd that there was nothing out there to say, this is how you navigate this experience. So I remember going, to all of the pillars, if you wish, and I was very much working in a trust, and there were support structures, if we want to talk about that, but it was very much you need to go and fix yourself, and then maybe you can come back after. So, and there wasn't anything helping me to make sense of what had happened, helping me to make sense of what it means to have sort of mental health difficulties as a clinical psychologist and the layers that brings. And also there was a bit of a panicky reaction, that's the best way I can describe it, with everyone not knowing what they were supposed to do, and looking at me for answers in a moment where I didn't have any.
No, and why would you? And none of us do in these moments. It's just sometimes the pain is so raw, there's no language, it can feel really nebulous, and we know from working as therapists that you have to meet people where they are, you don't have all the answers. So suddenly in a system where perhaps you used to be the person, go to the clinical psychologist about understanding how to kind of manage mental health or something, you're not available in that same way.
No. And as you say, that I didn't have any language yet. I didn't know what had happened. It was very much, the first time that particular experience was happening to me. And I remember even the process of occupational health being very, I'm not going to talk about that too much, but just very, very much about the medical model, which works for some people. But at that point, it just didn't work for me because I wanted someone to explain why that was happening. And there were layers of, I think what the system also wasn't understanding was that there were layers of my own personal experience and what I was coming with in terms of my history and, my upbringing and my experiences that we all have in some way. Yeah. But there was also a layer of what was going on at work and what was going on in the workplace and the trauma that I was exposed to in there, in terms of, I guess, both the client work, some very difficult relationships that were going on in the workplace with supervisors. And the system could only see my own stuff. So whenever I was trying to explain, this is also going on, this is traumatizing, and it's sort of ongoing new trauma, it kept going back to, but you're feeling this way because of that, because of that experience that you have in your past. So it almost like although we can take a more holistic approach with our clients, for a professional within a system, the system wasn't really wanting to or ready to see its own failings in that way, and what was going on, which was live and ongoing for me in a way that I guess through therapy I'd overcome some of my past things, but what was live and ongoing wasn't going to go away. So it was that real battle between sort of acknowledging my own difficulties from the past and looking at those in therapy, and I had a brilliant therapist who helped me make sense of that, but also really voicing, and that's where the anger really came in, really voicing what was going on and what wasn't okay in the here and now, which can be really difficult, I think.
Yeah, I was hearing you about those two things. One is, something you said earlier about what's kind of happens within the internal agencies of our own trusts and our own systems, so occupational health, HR, management, lines of supervision, and the extent to which we actually need to look at those much more closely to make sure they're psychologically informed, trauma informed. I had the almost kind of slightly ridiculous feeling of going to occupational health, and first of all for me, again, personally, medical model wasn't useful. I had years in analysis understanding my difficulties, so I had a narrative, and there were boxes to fill in, and that didn't make any sense to me, and I kind of had that conversation, and I also felt that I knew much more about mental health than the person that I was seeing, so I was almost having to school myself in occupational health, which didn't help, and I'm like, where is the very specific psychologically informed, trauma-informed input and expertise into occupational health? Now, I can't say what that's like now because I went through this in 2015, but my experience then was that it was almost like it was pretty basic. And then the other thing about having for me, I had a mixed formulation, like an integrative formulation of what happened, which was something about my own personal pain that came up through some client work, despite years of brilliant analysis which had helped me work through so much and had been excellent. There was just something I hadn't got to, and that's how our psyche works sometimes. We have to be so compassionate about our protections and our defences and the time that it takes to get to things sometimes. So that had come up to me, and I knew where to take that, so I could take that to a personal space. But there was also what was going on was a very difficult situation of massive change going on in the organisation around me. So slightly different from yours in terms of yours were more relational difficulties. Mine was signing off from clinical supervision, changes to that, plus a merger, plus a restructure, plus a complete change in how we were going to provide services, all within months and months of each other. And that, on top of my own personal pain, was so destabilising. But what it comes back to, as you say, is to what extent can trusts and workplaces actually look at the internal workings of how the quality of the contacts that you have with each of those kinds of agencies.
Yeah, and I had this really bizarre experience at some point, because I was sort of from the beginning of the process, I was going through therapy. I sought therapy pretty much straight away, and then was in therapy for about a year and a half, probably a year and a bit. And there was this really strange process of suddenly feeling a lot better in a lot of ways. So I was going through therapy, I could see my stuff was processing, I was accessing EMDR in particular. Yeah. But then I wasn't feeling better. I don't know if that makes sense. So there was like this, my own memories feeling less painful and my own past feeling a lot less painful. But then when I was talking about the new trauma and the ongoing trauma, I wasn't feeling better because there was trauma in my workplace.
That really differentiated it.
Yeah. So there was suddenly a very clear, and I remember having this conversation with my therapist, because I was like, I remember feeling really frustrated and just, bursting into tears in the therapy room and getting really angry after that, because it became so clear to me that it wasn't about me anymore. It was about, and I work with trauma in my sort of professional role, and at that point I could understand, okay, there's this layer, that layer I'm sort of processing, but there's this ongoing stuff, and we wouldn't, if a client was in an unsafe relationship or an unsafe environment, that's what we would tackle, but that just wasn't seen, it wasn't acknowledged. So it was then months of me getting really, really angry and voicing it to different people that eventually got somewhere. But it was just really strange how, I guess, closed off to it the system and people within it were. And I guess there was this question kept coming back to me, which was, who are we trying to protect, or what are we trying to protect? Why are we not naming things? And that wasn't just, my immediate system. It goes sort of beyond that into professional bodies, into all of the pillars really, and the way we work with that. Because there's, again, going back to the guidelines, there is no guidelines that sort of or position statements at the moment anyways, that really tackle employee-employee relationships or supervisor-supervisee relationships. So there's no safeguard really for what can happen in the workplace sometimes. And
there's a big blind spot, isn't there? People
massive.
just think it can't happen, but it does. Things can be really difficult. And I think, again, kind of saying that it's important to work systemically.
Yeah.
So the wellbeing policies that we see, and I haven't read the people plan fully, although I understand there are some things in there that sound really good around destigmatising and inclusivity. So we want to see. I'm interested in the implementation.
Yes,
plans.
definitely.
So that's what we're interested in. What are people going to do then? But anyway, we're going to have a look at that. But. The point is that you can have all these wellbeing policies and making sure you're hydrated at work, taking breaks, having lunch times, all the things that it feels even amazing that we have to have those in health because we should know better, and the fact we have to plan those in and make that into a policy is kind of unbelievable, but okay, it's there, it is what it is. But then when it comes to experiencing mental health problems and really tabling that as mental health problems, the staff lived experience networks are about mental health problems. People find it so hard to label it that or to name it that because of stigma, I think.
Definitely.
But absolutely, it's about tabling it.
Yeah.
And it's about really looking at the experience then of those who are going through the system, kind of on the inside of it, as you were, kind of breaking down on the inside or having difficulty inside. Actually what that's like for people. And we get to hear a lot about that through the peers that we're connected with, and that's why it's a peer power base, and that's why it's many voices together, because there is no way on earth that any one person could do this.
No, and it's too much, isn't it, for one person? Yeah. And I think as well, as you say, that there's something about the naming of mental health difficulties in mental health professions as a whole, not just clinical psychologists, I'm speaking from that position, but there's something that is really unsafe, both for the person, but also for the system for some reason. And I remember, at some point in my experience, it was almost like I wasn't a human, I was just a clinical psychologist. So for some reason, people were forgetting that I was a human being first, and I could therefore have struggles, I could experience mental health difficulties. And I remember, some people even telling me, like, you're a clinical psychologist, why can you not explain to us what is going on? And I was like, because I don't know yet, I don't know, I don't understand it. And it would be great if we could swallow 1 million books and then just become somehow immune by osmosis. But it just it just doesn't happen, because of course pain is, it's there for everybody when it happens.
And it's embodied and it's cellular, and sometimes you don't know, and that's why therapy, for example, can be so helpful, because you have another mind on it with you. You have somebody else who's trained to kind of see perhaps what you can't see, and it beggars belief anyway that this should be not understood, and it also makes us really angry that people out there who are providers of mental health services should have to feel ashamed alone, as if something's wrong with them, for experiencing mental health difficulties, and it just is not the case. So it integrate, as well as having the peer support that needs to be there, that isn't really there in any other way, or certainly hasn't been since I launched it before. So that's the one thing. It's about getting out and doing workshops, not only of those coming up through the system, through different psychology and counselling courses at undergraduate level, or into the DCLIN psych courses, of relationships with our RMN colleagues, mental health social workers, psychiatry, all of those academic backgrounds and training backgrounds, but then the qualifieds, and then the professional bodies around that. What are they saying? What are they doing? We're interested to know.
Yeah, because there's something about who holds it. That was, what was coming up for me, is there was no holding place.
No.
There was no, and sometimes even a position statement or a guideline, although it's a piece of paper, it can do a lot. It can really mean a lot for people, because it gives you a bit of a sense of, okay, how do we do this? And that's what is often missing. It's who is holding all of this, and who helps us understand how things should be managed and supported, but also valued. I think we often miss the value of those experiences in what happens in trusts and in other places as well. The value of lived experience.
I have to say, talking about kind of holding and containment, there's something from my own lived experience that where I didn't have that at one point, like really early on, and because I had that lived experience, although it's incredibly painful, and I'm still kind of working through some of it, I understood how important it was to even just kind of build a forum, to work on a guideline, to have that holding. It's those people who have experienced kind of difficulties in those areas actually get great expertise in them.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I mean, I could talk about the value of therapy as well for me. It's I guess therapy is what really made me understand myself, but also the work that I do in some ways, and the value of what had happened. Because there's one thing, I always go back to this, it's one thing reading things on the books and, understanding it at an intellectual level, and sort of, reading the theories and learning about psychological principles. But when you're going through that really dark place, it just teaches you something. It teaches you, compassion is a big one, but it also teaches you a deeper understanding of where people might be at. And, obviously everyone's experiences are different. I'm not suggesting that you will understand everything you come across, but it just gives you something more, that is what it means to be there and to not have the words, and to just really struggle to verbalize what you're feeling and where you are, and to have, even the shame, as painful as it was, to have that experience of people not understanding and what the stigma meant for me. It was just really, really valuable now, because it does open up conversations and questions about the work that we do, ultimately.
It does.
Yeah.
And there's something also for me about my ability to be able to sit with my own desperation and pain.
Yeah.
Like the darkness, so frightening. It's so frightening. I used to call it like my personal Everest. The biggest thing I've ever done is the internal Everest, the kind of the internal work. And my ability to be able to sit with that pain more definitely increased my ability to be around other people's pain.
Yeah.
That's another thing. It kind of gave me. That's how I experienced it.
Yeah, and sometimes there's that sitting with, which is really important. I know I wasn't very good at it at some point, and that experience of having to live with my own pain and having to navigate what that meant, and learning how to shift it. It's even, it's really painful even thinking about it. But then there's that understanding of actually sometimes there isn't a fix. There isn't something that you can magically do and it's gonna, make it go away. Sometimes it is about being alongside somebody in that way, and just sitting with, and being compassionate. I think that's what was missing for me in that experience. From people, my friends and family were wonderful, but other people in my surroundings, that compassion of what was going on, there was a real sense of, can you just fix it for us, and come back all grounded and fixed, and a real misunderstanding of recovery and what that means. It's a journey. I don't think there was this almost strange idea of, you've gone off sick, you're unwell, then you go through therapy or whatever you might do, and then you come back fixed, and then you can never go back, when actually that becomes part of your experience. So, even the going through therapy was stigmatized, because it's like, well, why are you going to, if you're a therapist, can you go to therapy? And I was like, yeah, of course, that's, that should be the case.
Really great practice.
Exactly.
Especially because it's needed. Some you can do therapy as an exploration.
Yeah.
Some people do, and analysis can be an exploration. But also when you go because you need it.
Yeah.
It's hard to say you need it, isn't it?
It is really hard.
So you need a hand. Get it. But I don't know. I just think that those return to work aspects that you're talking about, and how return to work happens at the moment with people who struggle with their mental health. We can just do so much better.
Yeah.
We really can. And so there's ways into this, and for us who are mental health professionals with lived experience, I guess it's like a fusion in some way of those two things, an honouring of both of those, both the training and our kind of knowledge, but also about all those other parts of ourselves. And we know, you know, that the extent to which you can try and operate from a whole position and bring in as much of yourself as possible, that's a really strong position. And sometimes that takes real work. But we should not be telling people that they need to be leaving parts of themselves at the professional door when they come in, especially with so many of us come in because of our lived experience, you know. It just shouldn't be the case.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, that's really sometimes what is missing. And I'm lucky at the moment. I mean, I say lucky, we shouldn't be lucky when those things happen. But, you know, at the moment, I have a really supportive supervisor. And what is really great about that experience is that I can bring my whole self. You know, I can bring my lived experience, I can talk about it, I can make sense of it within my work, and it's accepted, it's sort of, you know, discussed, it's welcome. And that wasn't always the case for me. And it's, you know, it really shows you how important that can be, that you can just be your human self, you know, even in the workplace. And of course we are a bit different in different environments, but there's a difference in leaving, you know, a bit of yourself away because that's, you know, for your family or for your friends, and having to leave a whole part of you that is really actually important. And it's, you know, something that I really value my lived experience now, and I wouldn't, as painful as it was, I wouldn't, you know, not have it, because it's just taught me so much. So that expectation that we just should leave that very, very important part of ourselves out there, it's just bizarre. and
I think,
just
you know,
okay.
It's that same thing as the extent to which we understand ourselves is the extent to which we can really understand the other if we're doing real depth work. You know, some people out there are doing this real depth work, and in some places that, you know, you know, if you want to be an analyst, you absolutely have to have analysis. You know, you have to know yourself. So your sounding board for the projections and the transferences and the counter-transferences is really clear. You know, what's mine, what's the others. And it's just, in a way, it's about taking that idea, you know, and making it more accessible in all clinical supervisions. You're working with minds in mental health. You know, you're working with minds, you're working with your own minds, you're working with the other mind, you're working in relationships together. You have to be able to kind of feel comfortable to bring yourself, you know?
Yeah, and you're working with, I always say, you know, you're working with messy stuff, you know, you're working with feelings that, and you can't, as much as we'd like to believe that we're sort of very grounded and, you know, very professional and very neutral in things, you feel things in the therapy room as a therapist, you know, because you can't, feelings are exactly.
I probably felt so much, you know, and, you know, I always needed somebody to kind of, you know, help me. I really valued the clinical supervision I had, but I went in and said, okay, well, I'm a sponge. So that's, you know, let's work with that. That's where I come from, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just that ability to understand, and that's where, for me, therapy came in, but also clinical supervision and that sharing of narratives, I think, in understanding, you know, some of the stuff that happens between two people in the therapy room. Because, as you say, you know, we're working with minds, we're working with humans, we're not working with...
And feelings and bodies.
And all of that messy, lovely stuff.
Everything's always messy when you begin, for anyone, for all of us. You know. Of course it is. Even developmentally, things start messier and differentiate as we grow. You know, it's the same thing.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm feeling so many things at the same time. Like I'm feeling how great it is to have this conversation with you. I know we've had this conversation before, and, you know, over time, and just to kind of be together with somebody, even just the two of us talking right now about this stuff, just feels really good, you know, and really real. And then to think that we have these minds together, kind of taking Integrate forward, it's really exciting. And then thinking about the series, thinking about those amazing people from all different professions, from here, Australia, and also the States, you know, who have come together to kind of share their stories. It's absolutely wonderful. And it really is about having a chorus of voices or a choir of voices out there, and we're going to keep on doing it, aren't we?
Yeah, and it's, as you say, it's just lovely to even bounce ideas, bounce narratives, share things, because you're just alongside each other, and that, what it's really wonderful about these conversations with you is often, that understanding and that being, from coming from a similar position of, we're human beings. It's, of course it's okay. And sometimes, we're quite vulnerable. Sometimes we're less vulnerable, and that's just how it is. And, similarly in those narratives, and I've listened to some of them, and sort of really exciting that we're going to publish that soon, because again, it's that sort of coming together and sharing those stories that hopefully will, even if it shifts something for one person, I think, that's brilliant, really.
It is. And I was laughing a bit there, because I was remembering something that I say in training often, is that this should just be boring. It just should be an on-issue. Be like, of course, if somebody, somebody came to me and said that, they felt that they were breaking down in service, I'd be like, what do you need?
Yeah.
Of course, what do you need? We'll sort it out. It's not for you to then sort out the service. You are not the service. You are a human working within the service that we provide. So services just have to get so much better around that as well, what to do when people need to take time out, for sure.
Yeah, and it's creating those compassionate cultures everywhere, not just between humans. Because sometimes the thing about systems is that often the humans within it are great.
Yeah.
But the system does something that then means that things just don't go the way that they should, and then people suffer and people can't open up, and it isn't safe for a lot of people because of all sorts of things, fitness to practice and other,
fitness to practice here.
Yeah, let's not even start on that.
As big as this country, I think, as big as the world, and it absolutely needs to be cut down to size, because it is not the case if you're somebody who is struggling with a mental health problem and you're speaking to somebody trusted about it, and you're doing the things that you need to do, you're taking some time out or whatever. Those conversations are competence in action. This is not incompetency in any kind of way. But that's for a whole other talk.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe we'll do some more talks.
Maybe we will. I think we will.
we're inventing off the sleep here, if that's even a phrase. So anyway, I think we need to draw to a close.
Yes.
Is there anything else that you wanted to say before we do?
No, just sharing the excitement about the series coming along, and just seeing where that leads.
Yeah. Thank you so much to all our contributors. You've been amazing, and as I've said at the end of some of the episodes that you'll see, the hope to just keep in touch, is really important. And
thank you to those listening as well. And if there's if you have any questions, or you have any concerns, or you want to ask us anything, just please go on our website and feel free to get in touch, and we'll get back to you.
Yeah, there's a contact page there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.